everybody. I'm here today to talk a little bit about practicing with you and how to develop a practice routine that you can rely on and that will help you develop as an artist and as a musician, as a singer. So we all know that practice is essential for growing as a musician, but I think many people do struggle with what to practice, how to get to the practice room. So I wanted to share a few tips with you about what has worked for me and for colleagues over the years as far as developing a routine that you can really count on. So one of the biggest challenges I think with practicing is actually just getting yourself to the practice room. I always tell people that at some point one of my teachers told me, think of practicing like brushing your teeth. Think of it like something that you just do every day, that you don't think about, that you don't have to consider whether you want to do it or not. It's just part of your life, and you just go and you just do it. And I think the easiest way to make that happen actually is by scheduling it, making sure that your practice sessions are always on your calendar, the same way that your classes are, your coachings, your lessons, things that you would not just ignore and not go to as you might with practicing if they weren't scheduled. Look for times of day when you are at your best. In the morning if you're a morning person, in the evening if you're more of a night owl. You know yourself best, and you know when you're most focused and when you're feeling fresh and energized. Those are good times to schedule your practice sessions. Obviously, you can't always do that. You're not completely in control of when you can schedule a practice room and whatnot, but look for those times at least a few times a week when you know you can be at your best for your practicing. Because practicing does take focus. I think one of the reasons it's easy to put off is because it does really require us to go into a place of focus that we don't always find throughout the day when there are many distractions around us. You really have to find an inner quiet place, I think, where you can think and maybe get into the zone where you just feel creative and start exploring with different ideas. And that's a hard thing to find sometimes with all of our distractions on a daily basis. So try your best to find those isolated times when you really, really can bring yourself to a mindful practice place. That's the most important thing about it. Well, because I know that can be kind of an unknown for many people. My students record their voice lessons and I make them take notes on their voice lessons. And those notes, the whole point of those notes is to be your guidelines for your practicing for the week. So I tell my students to take those notes with you to the practice room. And the first thing you should do the day after your voice lesson or 2 days after your voice lesson, whenever it is you start your practicing again, is go through the notes, and those are the things you do in your first session. So work on the vocalises that you did with your teacher in your lesson and focus on the things that he or she told you to work on in those vocalises and try to improve upon those things. You can, of course, branch out and do other vocalises as you like, but it's really important that you do try to focus on the things that your teacher was trying to teach you for the week. It gives you guidelines, but it also helps you progress, and that makes your teacher happy too. So using the notes to help your practice, the same thing with the repertoire as you do with your vocalises. Work first on the songs that you did with your teacher and focus on the things that your teacher told you to focus on and see if you can get somewhere with those things. I think that's a really good place to start with practicing. That really varies person by person, the same way that I would say that when to practice varies. Knowing yourself and knowing how time works for you, right? So for myself, I'm actually, I think maybe in the minority here because I'm somebody who likes to practice for long periods of time at once. I'm not someone who likes to practice for 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. Because for me, what I was sort of alluding to before, it takes me a while to kind of get into that focused place where I really do feel creative and feel inspired about what I'm doing, because there's so much going on all the time in our lives. It's hard to get into that centered place. So I do personally like to have a good 15 or 20 minutes of just warming up, of kind of getting into the zone, and then I get into my repertoire. These are, of course, when I have a lot of time to practice. This is what I ideally do, but I don't always have that much time. But on a good day, having maybe an hour and a half would be what I would like to do. But that's just me. And I know a lot of people who are very, very successful at practicing in smaller chunks of time, 30, 40 minutes at a time, maybe a couple times a day. really works better for a lot of people. So that's something that you should experiment with and try different time periods, try different times of the day, but also how long you're going to go is something you'll just have to kind of experiment with and get to know what works best for you. Of course, when you're young, vocal fatigue is a big issue as you're sort of just beginning to develop your technique and your muscles maybe aren't quite sure what they're supposed to be doing, and you can get tired a lot faster than someone who's been singing for many, many years. So probably the smaller chunks of time are better for the younger singers, but do give yourself enough time that you can get to a focused place. So maybe it's 30 minutes of singing, but another 20 minutes of just working with texts and thinking about interpretation, because that is such a huge part of what you do as well. Those are some of the tips that have worked for me over the years. I think letting yourself start with a very structured way of going about practicing and then letting your mind go into different places. The most important thing is that you do approach your practicing from a place of mindfulness. You come to your practice session with ideas and you let yourself think as you're practicing. You're not just kind of running through vocalises without thinking about them, but you're thinking about what this is feeling like as you're building your technique. Same thing with your repertoire. You're not just running through songs without thinking about your interpretation. You're making decisions and making that's what that helps you become a better artist as you're growing. So hopefully that was helpful. Just a few little tips for all of you, and you can always reach out to all of your teachers for more of their ideas, because we all have tips on what has worked for us as developing musicians and as professional musicians, but it's such an individual thing and it really depends on who you are and what you need to be successful. Thanks for listening.